Like many of you, I was concerned when I started hearing rumours, I think around the beginning of Warzone 2, that some of the players you were fighting against in the game weren't real, that they were just AI bots. Now thankfully those rumours ended up not being true. Activision came out and outright denied it, and now Warzone actually does have a mode with bots in it that's expressly designed for newer players, with the idea being that newer players can fight against each other, but with loads and loads of bots padding out the player numbers to give them an easier time. Obviously that's been horrendously abused by content creators trying to get high kill games, but the idea was pretty nice. And even though the reaction to the idea of there being bots in Call of Duty was pretty negative, it's actually fairly standard in other Battle Royale games. Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, when you play your first few games, or if you've been away for a while, your first few games, will normally have a ton of bots in them, so you're very likely to win those games and have high kill matches, just while you're kind of finding your feet again, rather than just putting you into a game where you immediately get deleted. Even Warzone Mobile, the version of Warzone that's available on your mobile phones, uses a bunch of bots. They said at launch that they were trying not to use bots where possible because they said, oh, it's always better to fight against real players. But they kind of changed their minds with the beginning of Season 3, where they said to give people a slightly easier experience, they're introducing more bots into the game. Some people have said it's to kind of cover up the fact that lots of people have stopped playing Warzone Mobile and server populations are super low, but for whatever reason, there are bots in that game, and like in Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, it's quite hard to tell who's a bot and who's not. Now, obviously, if you watch their behaviour, you can tell who's a bot and who's not. The bots seem to want to just kind of walk out into the open and then keep on repeating the same little path over and over again. It's very, very strange. But in terms of just turning around a corner and running into a player, the bots look exactly like players. They have names that looks like they could be real usernames. They have varied cosmetics. They're not all dressed in the same way. They're pretty much indistinguishable outside of their behaviour. And after playing a bunch of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Warzone Mobile over the last few days, I've started thinking maybe bots are the future of Warzone. Maybe this is exactly what Warzone needs to kind of get its core audience of normal players back. Because to me, one of the big problems with Warzone right now, one of the big things that stops normal people from playing, and stops me from playing a lot of the time, is that the skill gap has got so big that there's some people who have been playing Warzone since 2020, like going on 5 years now, and have got insanely good at the game. You know, they're playing 6 hours a day every day, they've got incredibly good at it, and they've got so many different tools and advantages based on things like their settings within the game, their ability to do things like slide cancelling, to make the most of aim assist, to use things like head glitches, all of this weird stuff that the game doesn't really teach you. They've got all of these advantages, and then a normal person going into the game, someone who maybe plays a couple hours a week and doesn't know about any of that stuff, gets absolutely destroyed by them. Frankly, I play a lot more than normal people do. I almost play Warzone as my job, although I do try to be a bit more of a variety streamer and I try to play a lot of other games, but still I know most of my content revolves around Warzone and Call of Duty, and I still find these people well beyond me. Maybe it's because I haven't been playing Warzone that religiously since it came out. I had plenty of breaks, like I played DMZ for a year, I played Zombies for quite a long time. There's lots of time periods where I haven't really played it, and I've never been really that interested in kind of practicing my movement or head glitches or having the best settings to get the highest frame rates or trying to learn how to abuse aim assist or anything like that. But for whatever reason, I've clearly fallen behind a kind of average skill curve for Warzone, and I'm getting deleted like everybody else. It's very disheartening to get into a game and have somebody fight you in a sort of one-on-one gunfight, and for them to be able to kill you in a way that you just couldn't hope to replicate. It doesn't feel like a fair fight anymore, it just feels like you're never going to be able to keep up with these people. I know there's some arguments that, oh, that's how you learn to get better. I mean, and that's not how learning works at all. Speaking as someone who was a teacher for 13 years, you really don't learn by getting absolutely destroyed by someone who is leagues ahead of you. Instead, you learn better and you kind of increase your skills, improve your skills, practice the most efficiently by playing against people who are roughly the same level as you. And in theory, that's where skill-based matchmaking should come in. But despite what a lot of people say online, I really don't think skill-based matchmaking is that strong at all. Particularly the sort of time of day I play, where I tend to play early in the morning, where there's a lot less people playing in general, the server populations are pretty low. It seems like Warzone just kind of groups you all together. And in the information that Call of Duty have released about their own matchmaking, they said skill actually isn't one of their priorities really. They do include it as one of the many things they think about during matchmaking, but really it's focused on connection and the time you've spent waiting to matchmake. So as I've said many times before, if you're thrown into a match where there are 100 other players, say a match of solos, and they're kind of a random group of people, you can assume that they would kind of follow the average skill curve, the bell curve of skill for the Call of Duty community. And that means you're going to get a few people, a handful of people who are up in the higher end of that, and they are going to absolutely dominate Warzone. And you see this all the time if you watch really good content creators playing the game who are, exceptionally skilled at the game, and they're racking up 20, 30 kills in a single match. That means there's, 20 or 30 other people who are dying, or maybe 10 people who are just dying over and over again in something like Resurgence. And this is really a fundamental problem with Battle Royale games. Everybody wants to do well, everybody wants to have fun, everybody wants to get some wins in gunfights and to win some matches. But if you have, for the sake of argument, we'll talk about solos where you have 100 players, and we won't worry about Resurgence too much to start off with. If you have 100 players dropping into a match of Warzone, only one of those players is going to win, which means 99 players are going to lose. If the match was entirely fair, then you would have a 1% chance of winning every match you're in. You would expect to win one match out of every 100 matches you play. For context, I think I've played Warzone Mobile for 21 hours, and I've still not played 100 matches of it. I've played something like 90. So taking, for example, someone who plays Warzone for 2 hours a week, which I think is pretty ordinary, they could expect to win one match maybe every 2.5 months or so. They would probably expect to win maybe 4 or 5 matches in an entire year. That sounds pretty miserable by anyone's standards. I think I would just stop playing Warzone if I only won a match every couple of months. But then the problem is much, much worse than that. You don't have a 1% chance of winning a game of Warzone because, as I said, there's kind of a skill curve, a bell curve, where a lot of players are in the middle. There's some players who aren't good at all, so they're at the lower end of it. And then there's some players who are incredibly good, and they're the ones getting 20, 30 kills. They're much more likely to win the game than you are. So say if you get someone who's really good at the game and they win 50% of their matches, they win half of the matches they play, and obviously there's some people who win way more than half their matches, but even if they win half, that means they're winning 50% instead of their kind of allotted 1%. That means there's a bunch of people now who aren't winning the game they should have won. Instead, this person's just winning multiples. And even when you just think about it on a gunfight level, every time you're fighting against someone, assuming it's 50-50, you should be winning 1 in every 2 gunfights. So that means in a match of Warzone, 50 people should win their first gunfight and 50 people should lose. So that's 50 people out of the game and then 50 people allowed to carry on. That means half of the people in every game don't even get a single kill. Obviously, Call of Duty have done lots of things to try and mitigate that a little bit. So things like Resurgence, having lots of options to buy back your teammates, trying to have things like jailbreaks where you come back into the game. They've tried to make it so even if you make a mistake, even if you lose a gunfight, you've got a decent chance of getting back into the game and maybe scoring a win somehow, even maybe just getting a win in the gulag. But all of these problems still remain, that a small percentage of the best players in every game are going to be dominating the lobbies. So if you're a normal player of Warzone, it's entirely possible that you will play many games in a row where you don't get any kills or you get 1 or 2 kills and you don't get any wins. And that's kind of miserable. And I think that's what's been happening to Warzone for a while now, that lots of people who play the game who don't get many wins, they don't get many kills, they stop playing because they're not really having that much fun, and the people who keep on playing are the people who win loads of games and get lots of kills because they're having a great time, and eventually you end up with just those people left. That raises the average skill base, so now the people who used to be good at the game actually can't keep up with the kind of average players. They're now the worst players and they'll eventually drop off, and this problem gets worse and worse over time, where the average skill base gets higher and higher, and the bigger the skill gap is, the bigger the difference is between a bad player and a good player, the bigger this problem is. So, what's the solution? Well, you could have a lot less players in a game, and this happens, with Resurgence and things like that, where there's only 44 players in a game. That gives you a much higher chance of winning. Or you could play things like quads, where instead of a 1% chance of winning, you've now got a 4% chance of winning because there's only 25 teams. Or you could add a bunch of players into the mix who don't care if they lose, who don't care if they don't get a single kill, who might even work as kind of easy targets for players to boost their own stats. You could just add a bunch of bots. If you add bots but you don't tell people that they're not real, then other players will feel good about killing them, but the bots won't feel bad about losing. Other players will feel good about winning games, even if there's a bunch of bots in there so they didn't really beat that many humans, but the bots don't care that they're losing all of their games. It seems like almost a perfect solution. Now, obviously there's a pretty big elephant in the room, and that's that bots just aren't that much fun to play against. They do really stupid things. The bots in Warzone Mobile at the moment just kind of walk out into the open and then keep on walking backwards and forwards. They're not very interesting to play against. The developers could make the bots much more difficult. That would be easy to do. Just make them more accurate, make them aim quicker, give them some little cheats so they know where you are so they can come and find you. But that wouldn't be very engaging either. The fun thing about playing against other humans is the fact that they're kind of unpredictable, the fact that they do interesting things. That's the good part of it. So for bots to work in a game like Warzone, they really do need to work on AI. But surely that's something that is feasible nowadays. Surely with all of the kind of AI models making videos and pictures and audio and stuff like that, they could do things based on player behavior just to try and train bots to act in a similar way to how humans do, to make the same mistakes humans do at different levels. Forza Motorsport did this a little bit with their drive avatars, where the idea is that they would learn how your friends drive, and then they would be in your game driving in a similar way. So if your friends tend to skid around corners, the drive avatars would skid around corners. If your friends tend to cut corners trying to overtake people, the AI would dive bomb into you the same way. It didn't work perfectly, but it did make them a little bit more interesting than a generic kind of follow the racing line AI. Obviously an FPS game like Warzone is infinitely more complex than that, but I still think they could probably do something here. So just speaking for myself, and obviously this is just an opinion-based thing, I kind of think if there were more bots in games, if there were more bots in Warzone, and you weren't told that they were necessarily bots, they were just players that didn't seem to be very good in your games, I think that would probably be a win for everybody. Skill-based content creators would be able to get their crazy clips and, their games where they're getting 50 kills in a game. People like me would be able to just play and win a lot more games than I currently do, and, win a lot more gunfights and be able to try out different things. And even the very worst players would still be able to win some gunfights and feel good about themselves. I understand there'll be some people saying, oh, this is just like a participation prize, people shouldn't get rewarded for doing badly. But who cares? This is just a video game, it's just a toy. People already don't seem to care that some of the biggest content creators are having various methods to try and get into bot lobbies to play against people that are much worse than them. Why is it that much different if they're playing against bots where you can kind of customize how difficult they are? Obviously, you could still have things like ranked, where it's just against people all of the time, and you're just against players who are about as good as you, really crank up that skill-based matchmaking. But I think for the more casual game modes, maybe the answer isn't to get rid of skill-based matchmaking and have a free-for-all where the small percentage of the very best players are absolutely going to dominate every match, and a bunch of people are just going to be constantly losing, but instead just to add a ton of bots to the game. As always, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.